time to concentrate on. And off she went to New York. She came back at the end of 2 weeks with the following in the way of on dictaphone belts. We are now at the year 1908, which was the year that the Carnegie began operations. And in that year, the trustees, meeting for the first time, raised a specific question, which they discussed throughout the balance of the year in a very learned fashion. And the question is there any means known more effective than war, assuming you wish to alter the life of an entire people? And they conclude that no more effective means than war to that end is known to humanity. So then in 1909 they raised the second question and discussed it, namely, how do we involve the United States in a war? Well, I doubt at that time if there was any subject more removed from the thinking of most of the people of this country than its involvement in a war. There were intermittent shows in the Balkans, but I doubt very much if many people even knew where the Balkans was. Then finally, they answer that question as follows. We must control the State Department. And then that very naturally raises the question of how do we do that? And they answer it by saying we must take over and control the diplomatic machinery of this country. And finally they resolve to aim at that as an objective. Then time passes, and we are eventually in a war, which would have been World War I. And at that time, they record on their minutes a shocking report in which they dispatched to President Wilson a telegram cautioning him to see that the war does not end too quickly. And finally, of course, the war is over. At that time, their interest shifts over to preventing what they call a reversion of life in the United States to what it was prior to 1914, when World War I broke out. And they arrive at that point, they come to the conclusion that to prevent a reversion, we must control education in the United States. And they realize that that's a pretty big task. So to them, it is too big for them alone, so they approach the Rockefeller Foundation with the suggestion that that portion of education which could be considered domestic be handled by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that portion which is international should be handled by the endowment. And they then decide that the key to the success of these two operations lay in an alteration of the teaching of American history. So they approach 4 of the then most prominent teachers of American history in the country, people like Charles and Mary Bird, and their suggestion to them is, will they alter the manner in which they present this subject, and they get turned down flat. So they then decide that it is necessary for them to do, as they say, build our own stable of historians. And then they approach the Guggenheim Foundation, which specializes in fellowships, and say, when we find young men in the process of studying for doctorates in the field of American history, and we feel that they are the right caliber. Will you grant them fellowships on our say-so? And the answer is yes. So under that condition, eventually they assembled 20. And they take this 20 potential teachers of American history to London, and there they're briefed into what is expected of them when, as and if they secure appointments in keeping with the doctorates they will have earned. And that group of 20 historians ultimately becomes the nucleus of the American Historical Association. And then toward the end of the 1920s, the endowment grants to the American Historical Association $400,000 for a study of our history in a manner which points to what can this country can it look forward to in the future. And that culminates in a 7-volume book study, the last volume of which is, of course, in essence a summary of the contents of the other 6. And the essence of the last volume is the future of this country belongs to collectivism administered with characteristic American efficiency. That's the story that ultimately grew out of, and of course was what could have been presented by the members of this congressional committee to the Congress as a whole for just exactly what it said. But they never got to that point.
This is the story that emerged from the minutes of the Carnegie Fund.
That's right.
Carnegie Endowment
That's
Fund.
right.
And so...
It was official to that extent.
I see. And Catherine Casey brought all of these back in the form of dictated notes or verbatim readings of the minutes.
On dictaphone belts.
Are those in existence today?
I don't know. If they are, they're somewhere in the archives under the control of the Congress, House of Representatives.
How many people actually heard those, or were they typed up transcripts made of them? How many people actually heard those recordings?
Oh, 3 maybe. Myself, my top assistants, and Catherine. Yeah, I might tell you this experience as far as its impact on Catherine Casey was concerned was she never was able to return to her law practice. If it hadn't been for Carol Reese's ability to tuck her away on a job with the Federal Trade Commission, I don't know what would have happened to Catherine, but ultimately she lost her mind as a result of it.
The purpose and direction of the major foundations has changed over the years to the present.
Okay. All right. Back with Mysterious America here. As you can see, this very revealing insight. 3 people have listened to those dictaphone belts. Certainly, if somebody wants to come to the fore and put an expedition together to find the rest of this, I'm all for support of that. But as you can see, what we're talking about when you dissect this and you can and take it apart as Norman Dodd did, you can see the possibility. It's not a matter of everybody changing their mind all at once. It is a slow and gradual re-education into collectivism, into the fact that the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights simply has to go away, and that we have a new idea here. I remember when I went to college, there was the teacher that I had tried to explain it this way, and I'll imagine that many of you that went to college probably had it somewhere similar to this. He explained it this way. There's capitalism on one side, and then there's communism over here. In the middle, there's socialism. Couldn't be a bigger lie around. Socialism is much closer to communism. The only difference between the two is the actual methodology by which they're applied. Communism wants a revolution today, Socialism, there's different branches of that. One of them, called Fabian socialism, is one that does it very, very gradually. We'll get into that at a little bit later time, but the evidence and the different types of ways that this is done is manifested more successfully when it's done very gradually, very slowly. And there are organizations that have those agendas. As we don't have much time left, please do feel free to send an email with regards to the program today. I do have a couple minutes left. I have one more cut that I want to go ahead. It's very short, about, what is the goal, not the goal, but the effect of all of this. Go ahead and run that final cut, AJ, then we'll go ahead and talk about next week's show.
The purpose and direction of the major foundations has changed over the years to the present. What is it today?
Whole 100% behind meeting the cost of education such as it is presented through the schools and colleges of the United States on the subject of our history has proven our original ideas to be no longer practical. The future belongs to a collectivistic concept, and there's just no disagreement on this.
Why do the foundations generously support communist causes in the United States?
Well, because to them, what communism represents a means of developing what we call a monopoly. That is, the organization, we'll say, of large-scale industry into an administrable unit.
Do they think that they will be one of the administrators?
They will be the beneficiaries of it, yes.
There you go. Cut it, AJ. All right, back with Mysterious America. My name's Alex Bond, and we're about wrapping up. I do want to talk about what we're going to have next week, and certainly want to entertain your comments for this past program. There's a lot more to be said about what Mr. Norman Dodd did. I'm sure that if you go online or go to the library and ask about either Norman Dodd or The Creature from Jekyll Island, or a way to get to J. Edward Girvin's website, these videos still do exist of the entire interview. It's well worth listening to and should be a great learning tool should you be in school, because it'll definitely open your eyes to some of the things that are happening today. As far as next week, here's a question for you. What do the pyramids of Egypt, Easter Island, Nan Madol in the Pacific, the pyramids in South Central North America have in common with Coral Castle in Florida? Well, first, they all involve moving very large blocks of stone into exacting specifications, in some cases within tolerances that our engineers today do not even require for building. These were examples around the world of very ancient times, and if the discoveries that have been made over the past 50 years are any indication, then a lot of very real history and science has been ignored to keep the status quo. There has been one civilization on the planet is the status quo, and it has progressed steadily from the first spark of fire to the lunar landing. That's what you're to believe. Sadly, it appears that this manufactured history does not include many great secrets of our previous civilizations, and lost civilizations, I might add. Perhaps civilized man is much older than we understood them to be, and perhaps maybe 50 to 100, maybe 200,000 years. There's possibilities here, but we'll entertain those. We'll talk about those. This is all for stretching your mind. If you like to do that, join me tomorrow, because we are going to be talking about Coral Castle and its creator, a Latvian immigrant by the name of Edward Leedskalnin. He may have held the key to some of those ancient sciences. He didn't want to reveal it, though. He didn't feel mankind was quite ready for it, but he did say that the construction of his coral castle was something that was in conjunction with the knowledge of how to build the pyramids. Well, we'll find out a little bit more about those large blocks and how he moved them into place and cut them all by himself, a man of about 5 feet 6 inches and perhaps 100 pounds. So how can he move these 5, 10, maybe even 30-ton blocks? Well, we'll talk about it next week. Join me here on Mysterious America. Don't forget, email patrick@iwatchradio.com, and join me here next week for for another exciting